Shalom. Welcome to another deep dive. We are so genuinely thrilled you've carved out some time to be here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Whether you are prepping for a big meeting, commuting to work, or just taking a well-deserved walk to clear your head, we have a stack of notes today that might just fundamentally change how you view your own life.
It's definitely one of those topics that makes you stop and, evaluate your daily routines. The mission of our deep dive today is to explore a really foundational question raised by our sources. Are we truly the masters of our own destiny, as modern culture insists we are? Or is this deeply ingrained concept of absolute self-reliance actually a psychological trap?
Okay, let's unpack this because the core theme here pushes right back against the prevailing narrative. Today, we're exploring a deeply provocative concept that the text calls the transfer of sovereignty.
Right, the transfer of sovereignty.
Yeah, and in our modern era, an era that completely celebrates hustle culture, being your own boss, manifesting your own reality, the idea of voluntarily handing over the reins of your life sounds completely backwards. I mean, it sounds terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
But the author of these notes argues that this transfer is actually the only route to genuine, liberating spiritual awakening.
What's fascinating here is how the text addresses the psychology behind our modern obsession with autonomy. The author refers to it as the disguise of dignity.
The disguise of dignity.
Exactly. If you look at social media, movies, or self-help shelves, the messaging is universally consistent. Relying on others makes you vulnerable, and being your own ultimate authority makes you strong.
Right. You see it in the boss babe or Sigma male internet cultures. It's all about you do you and following your own truth.
Yeah, and it sounds incredibly empowering. It feels like the ultimate respect for human dignity. But our source material takes a very different view on that empowerment narrative.
It does. It argues that this modern idea of demanding absolute autonomy isn't actually a new, evolved way of thinking at all.
No, it's an ancient vulnerability wearing a modern disguise. The author draws a direct line back to humanity's ancestors, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden.
Okay, the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, the core temptation there wasn't just about eating a piece of fruit. It was the whispered promise that they could be like God, knowing good and evil.
So you're saying the text views our modern, be your own master culture not as psychological progress, but as a repetition of that original pride.
Precisely. The argument is that when society pushes the you are your own ultimate authority narrative, it's not actually respecting your dignity, it's inciting you.
Inciting you? Wow.
Yeah, it's poking at that exact same psychological soft spot, encouraging humans to usurp a role of ultimate moral authority that they were never designed to handle.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Doesn't modern psychology argue that having strong boundaries, self-belief, and personal autonomy is really the only way to be mentally healthy? How does the text reconcile the idea that being your own boss is somehow a trap?
That's a great distinction to make. The text isn't arguing against healthy boundaries or basic self-confidence. It's critiquing the idea of self as the ultimate moral compass.
The idea that you answer to no one.
Exactly. From the perspective of these writings, making yourself the center of the universe acts as a safe haven for immature souls.
A safe haven for immaturity. Meaning, if I'm the ultimate boss of my universe, I never have to admit I'm wrong.
That's it. If self is the highest power in your life, the logic naturally follows. I define my own right and wrong, and I don't need to answer to anyone.
Which is an incredibly appealing mindset.
Because it requires zero external accountability. You get to set the rules to a game where you always win. But the author points out that this illusion of self-mastery is dangerous because it means we actively avoid the uncomfortable, sometimes painful process of being pruned, corrected, and grown.
That makes a lot of sense. If I'm always right, I never have to change. And the notes pull in some ancient scriptural warnings that seem to perfectly anticipate this modern problem.
Right. The text groups a few key verses here.
Proverbs 3.5-7 is the first one, which famously warns us not to lean on our own understanding, but to trust the Lord. It explicitly says not to be wise in our own eyes.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the text pairs that with Jeremiah 17.9, which states that the human heart is deceitful above all things.
Deceitful above all things.
Yeah, to put it in modern terms, the text is saying your heart is like a GPS system that has been subtly hacked. If you blindly follow it, thinking you are a brilliant navigator, you're going to end up driving off a cliff.
I love that GPS analogy. It really clarifies why Colossians 2.8 is also highlighted here. That verse warns about being taken captive by hollow and deceptive philosophy.
And the author is clearly framing the modern hustle culture and self-worship as that exact hollow philosophy.
It promises you peace by making you the center of the universe, but it actually just leaves you exhausted.
Exhausted, and according to the text, profoundly deceived about your actual level of freedom. This raises an important question about the spiritual reality we live in. We love to picture ourselves standing in some neutral territory, objectively weighing our options and freely choosing our own adventure.
Right, like we are essentially freelancers in the universe, just taking on whatever contracts we want. But here's where it gets really interesting.
The myth of neutrality.
Exactly. The notes introduce a concept that completely shatters that illusion of the freelance life. The text states that humans are never actually their own masters. There is zero neutral ground.
That is the core paradigm shift of this entire stack of notes. According to this framework, if you aren't in Christ, you don't start at a baseline of neutral independence.
Yeah.
You start at the baseline of being a slave to sin.
That is framed as the default human condition.
Yes.
I have to stop you there. To a lot of people listening, the phrase slave to sin sounds incredibly intense, maybe even a bit archaic. What does the author actually mean by that in a practical sense?
It's a harsh term, I agree, but think about it in terms of the inertia of human habits and modern addictions. When people think they are freely choosing their lifestyle or asserting their fierce independence, the text argues they are often just sliding along the path of least resistance.
Ah, the path of least resistance.
Right. What modern culture calls doing your own thing is, from the spiritual perspective, often just acting as a slave to your own fleeting impulses, your flesh, and the cultural currents dragging you along. You aren't driving the car, the impulses are.
Wow. So if I'm understanding this correctly, faith isn't about working hard to finally become an independent, self-actualized master.
Not at all. That role isn't even on the table. The text proposes that faith is about a transfer of sovereignty. It is about moving your allegiance from being a slave of sin to becoming a servant of Christ.
You are essentially taking the title deed of your life and transferring it from one entity to another.
Yes.
Okay, but if both options involve having a master, why would someone voluntarily choose to transfer that deed? The notes spend a good amount of time contrasting these two masters, and the difference is pretty stark.
The contrast is absolute. Let's look at how the text describes the master of sin. This master rules through deception and oppression. It promises you the world, it flatters your ego, tells you you're the main character, but ultimately it drains you.
It leads to burnout, anxiety, and according to the theology of the text, spiritual and physical death. It's a master that consumes its subjects.
And on the flip side, the author presents the master of Christ, who offers completely different terms.
Right. Instead of oppression, there is love. Instead of being consumed, you receive protection and provision. The irony here is beautiful. The text asserts that fully submitting to this master is what actually leads to true freedom.
You surrender the exhausting burden of control, and in exchange, you get the absolute security of a master who has your best interests at heart.
The author grounds this heavily in scriptural evidence to force the reader to answer that uncomfortable question, who is your master?
Romans 6.16 lays it out with cold logic. You are slaves to the one you obey. You either obey sin, which leads to death, or you obey God, which leads to righteousness.
The notes also bring up 1 Corinthians 6.19-20, which says, you are not your own, you were bought at a price. Now, to a modern ear, being bought sounds very transactional, almost corporate. How should we interpret that?
To understand that, you have to look at the ancient concept of redemption that the text is drawing from. In the ancient world, if someone was enslaved and carrying a massive debt, another person could pay their debt to buy their freedom.
Ah, so it's a rescue.
The text is using that exact imagery. You were trapped in a debt of sin you couldn't pay, and Christ paid the ultimate price to buy you out of that destructive contract. Your life is not your own property anymore because it was rescued at a massive cost.
That reframes it entirely. It's not a hostile corporate takeover, it's a rescue mission. And that leads right into Galatians 2.20, which the author uses to summarize this transfer beautifully. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me.
It's framed as a complete change of residence. The old master has been evicted, and a new one has moved in.
Exactly. You aren't just upgrading your software, you are changing the entire operating system and the owner of the hardware.
That's a great way to put it.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now? Let's shift this from high-level theology to practical daily application. If the Master of Christ is so full of love and provision, and if this rescue mission has already happened, why is obedience still so incredibly hard for us?
Right. Why the struggle?
Yeah, why do we constantly experience decision fatigue trying to grab the steering wheel back?
That brings us to the daily struggle. The text is very realistic about this. It explains that even after you have chosen faith, even after a public declaration like baptism, the old self doesn't just quietly pack its bags and disappear.
So conversion isn't a magic wand that deletes your ego.
Far from it. The remnants of that old self, the part of you that desperately wants to play God, define its own rules, and worry about its own status, is still highly active.
And the author uses a great conceptual framework here.
Think of the old self like a terrible roommate who legally got evicted. The locks were changed, but they keep climbing back in through the window and trying to rearrange your furniture.
That is such a relatable analogy.
Right. They have no legal right to be there, but they are incredibly annoying.
And it explains why believers constantly struggle with anxiety and control. Obedience, according to the text, is not a one-and-done historical decision. You don't just transfer sovereignty on a Sunday 10 years ago and coast for the rest of your life.
No, and this is where the text offers a deeply practical tool. It suggests that true obedience requires a daily declaration of sovereignty, specifically in the morning.
The morning recalibration.
The concept is that the very moment you wake up, before you check your phone, before you let the stress of your inbox dictate your mood, you have to consciously recalibrate. You have to say, I am not the boss today. You are.
You literally have to hand over the keys before your feet even hit the floor.
Yes. And what's fascinating here is a text warning about why this daily recalibration is so necessary. It talks about the world's whispered deception.
Whispered deception.
We often think spiritual attacks will be these huge, overt crises, but the author argues the world will often just sneakily flatter you. It will whisper in your ear that you are so smart, your career is taking off, you are so capable.
Wait, but isn't it good to recognize your own hard work?
Recognizing it is one thing, but the trap is how it feeds the ego and lowers your spiritual vigilance. The text warns that if you forget for even a moment that Christ is Lord, you will quickly start mistaking God's grace and provision for your own personal talent.
I see.
Instead of looking at your family or your career and thinking, look at what God has graciously entrusted to me, you start thinking, look at this incredible empire I built.
Mistaking grace for your own talent. That is a brilliant way to phrase it, and it's a trap that is so easy to fall into, especially when things in life are actually going well. To combat this, our sources highlight 3 specific teachings to help practice this daily submission.
The scriptures provided here serve as a practical roadmap. First, James 4.7 says, submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you.
Notice the specific order there.
Exactly. The author points out that submission to God is the prerequisite. You don't have the power to resist the enemy's flattery or anxiety until you have surrendered your sovereignty to God.
Then there is Luke 9.23, which reminds us of the frequency required. It says, whoever wants to be a disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily.
And it's important to remember, to a first-century listener, a cross wasn't a piece of gold jewelry. It was an instrument of execution.
The text is literally calling for a daily death to that old self-ego. Not yearly, not when you feel inspired, but daily.
And finally, the text brings in Matthew 11.29-30 to offer the incredible promise of what this daily transfer of sovereignty actually feels like. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Let's break down that word yoke for a second, because I think a lot of us hear that and think of an egg yolk, or we just gloss over it.
Right. We have to look at the agricultural context. A yoke is a heavy wooden beam used to tie 2 work animals, like oxen, together so they can pull a plow or a cart.
Which honestly sounds terribly restrictive. If the goal is freedom, why is the text telling us to strap ourselves into a wooden beam?
That's the paradox the author is highlighting. In farming, a younger, weaker ox is often yoked to an older, stronger, experienced ox. The younger ox is still walking, still moving, but the stronger ox is actually carrying the vast majority of the weight and directing the path.
Oh, that's incredible.
The text argues that when you try to be your own boss, you are pulling the entire heavy cart of your life completely alone. That burden is crushing. But by sharing this yoke with Christ, he carries the actual weight. You surrender the right to choose the direction, but in return, your burden becomes light.
It completely changes the imagery. The burden of being your own ultimate moral authority, of having to manifest your own success and protect your own ego, is what causes modern burnout. The yoke of Christ actually brings rest.
Exactly. It's the prescribed cure for the exact exhaustion modern hustle culture creates.
So, to bring all these incredible notes together and summarize the core takeaway, the world's definition of freedom, doing whatever you want, whenever you want, and answering to no one, is actually a disguise.
It really is.
According to our sources, that path just makes you a slave to your own fleeting desires and anxieties. True freedom, as paradoxical as it sounds, is found entirely in submitting to the Lord of Truth. By giving up the keys, you finally get to stop carrying the weight of the world.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture of your daily life, it leaves us with something profound to consider as we wrap up. If true freedom actually comes from surrendering control, I want you to think about your life right now.
Yeah, think about your own situation.
What is one area, maybe it's your career trajectory, a specific relationship, or your financial anxieties, where insisting on being your own boss is actually causing you massive stress rather than actual freedom?
What a powerful question to chew on. What would it look like for you to wake up tomorrow morning before you check your phone and formally hand over the keys to that specific area of your life? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked some genuine aha moments for you and offered a totally fresh perspective on where true rest is found. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and may the Lord bless you.